to Jonathan Taylor. Huge hole. He's at the 30. He's going to go. 10, 5, touchdown. Jonathan Taylor made a man miss the line of scrimmage and then runs it into Pater for a one-handed INT. Are you kidding me? Kenny Moore.
What a play by Nyheim Hines.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
What's going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of the Bring the Juice Colts podcast. Today, we're going to be breaking down the second and third year players that were drafted by the Indianapolis Colts who we believe can be breakouts for the year 2021 into 2022. We did this last year, and you guys really liked it. It was a big conversation piece, and we're here to do it again. And you can't see him, but I have my buddy Andrew with me today. Cody's not able to, and a few other people are not here, but Andrew's going to do this with me today. Andrew, how are you doing, my man?
Well, I appreciate you having me on as always, Derek. And I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, man. It's good to talk some more Colts football, man. And let's just get into these lists, man. We have our second year drafted players. Now, keep in mind, everybody, this is only for drafted players. This is not guys we picked up in free agency, traded midway through the season. That doesn't matter. It's only our draft picks that we're discussing here over the last 2 years that matter for this topic of conversation. So, I mean, basically, Andrew, we can get started here with talking about the first guy that was drafted by the Indianapolis Colts this last year, and that'll be Michael Pittman Jr. And me personally, I think this is one of my biggest guys to break out. You know, I know he had a few games this last year where, you know, he was doing really well and showed that what he can do, but I think, you know, he still has yet to break out and be that perfect form of himself. Because we remember he was injured at the beginning part of the year, had the compartment leg syndrome, and then stated that he wasn't fully prepared and wasn't mentally ready for the game at that point early in the season, but then said he started to get confidence in himself as he went along. So for me personally here, Andrew, I think this is the first guy on this list that makes you think this guy is primed for a breakout if he stays healthy. What do you think?
Well, I 100% agree with you. I think Michael Pittman Jr. is well on his way to being the Colts, not only their number one receiver, in my opinion, but a potential star in the National Football League. And I've got his numbers here, Derek. The 2 or 3 games that stand out to me in the regular season are the November 8th matchup against Baltimore, 4 catches, 56 yards. A lot of Michael's catches were screen passes. It certainly, shows us what he was able to do when he got the ball in his hands rather quickly. And then he had a really nice game on that Thursday night in Tennessee, 7 catches, 101 yards. And the one play that really stands out to me from that is the end around towards mid-third, early fourth quarter, where he just takes off for 20 or 30 yards. And I mean, for a guy his size, 6'4", the first thought that comes to my mind isn't really speed, but for somebody that is as big as he is, he moves rather quickly. And then the other game, just a couple weeks later, is the Green Bay game. 3 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown. And the Colts really, really love to utilize Pittman last season as it specifically relates to the crossing routes. And that was the play that he had scored on against Green Bay, which is the blown coverage, I think, by the Green Bay defense. And Pittman, again, a quick pass into his hands, and he just does the rest. And like I mentioned just a second ago, for somebody his size, he moves rather quickly. But then the one game I think out of all the games that stands out to me, about Michael Pittman, is the Buffalo game, the playoff game. 5 catches for 90 yards. And he has certainly shown the ability, he certainly did in that game, to go up and kind of get the 50-50 contested ball. Was on that 32-yard catch in that game. And I think overall, Michael Pittman Jr. came into his own throughout the course of the end of the season. And I think that, like I said, he's going to not only be the Colts' number 1 receiver, in my opinion, but a potential star as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. The Colts utilized him in the crossing game a lot. I think they need to continue to try to use him more in the red zone. I hope they continue to do that next year. These next 2 players, I don't know. Andrew, you can tell me whether or not you think these guys are going to break out. I don't necessarily think they'll break out because I think they've already broken out. I think they've already shown us what they can do. They just need to put together a full season of it. Julian Blackmon and Jonathan Taylor. I mean, these two guys are, just phenomenal players. Julian Blackmon right out the gate came out and did what he did, only allowed 137 passing yards when being targeted by somebody. I mean, this guy was a stud, had multiple turnovers. And Jonathan Taylor, you saw when, the middle of the season came around and he started gaining understanding of the quickness of the game, there was no stopping him. I mean, Derrick Henry was the only running back better than him in the last 5 weeks of the NFL season. There was no question about it. So I don't really think that these two will really break out because I feel that they've already broken out. You can feel free to tell me whether or not you agree or disagree on that here. But also, I wanted to talk about our 4th-round pick from last year, and that was Jacob Eason. A lot of talk about who is going to be the quarterback of the future. Cody and I have been pretty adamant that the Colts are probably going to draft somebody or, pick somebody up in free agency. I'm not sure, but Jacob Eason sounding pretty confident in his ability to come in and be that number one guy. I mean, what's your opinion on Jacob Eason in this quarterback situation that the Colts have?
Well, for starters, Derek, I agree that Jonathan Taylor and Julian Blackmon have already broken out. We know the kind of impact Taylor had, especially during the back half of this past season. Same goes for Julian Blackmon, but maybe towards the first half of the season, I don't think he was as good in the back half as he was in the first half of the season. That's just my personal opinion. Nonetheless, I think they both are stars in the making. And once again, it just shows, in my opinion, why I think Chris Ballard, and I think many others think, he is regarded as one of, if not the best general manager in the NFL. But as far as Jacob Eason is concerned, I'm just going to kind of refer back to what Chris Ballard said just a few short weeks ago, and that's that the Colts really think that he's about a year away from being able to compete for that starting role. There's a lot of eagerness for fans to be able to see Jacob Eason. You invested a 4th-round pick, which isn't too high, but you invested a decent pick in Eason. Why is he not on the field more? Obviously, with this past NFL season being a little bit different, no preseason because of COVID and everything. I'm not sure if that'll impact this season or not. We hope not. However, he is, according to several Colts reporters, going to be working with Tom House, the quarterback guru, the same individual who worked with Andrew Luck back when he was with the Colts franchise. And so I don't really think Eason has an opportunity to break out because I don't see him being the starter. I am agreeing with you and Cody, and I think the Colts are either going to draft a quarterback or they're going to trade for a veteran like Derek Carr, maybe even Carson Wentz. So to me, I see Eason as playing the backup role for maybe another season or two. And then if the Colts still don't have an answer at quarterback, we may be able to see what the gunslinger has.
Totally get that, man. Yeah, totally get that. I think that, that's an argument that a lot of people just ignored. I think a lot of people just ignored that from Ballard. Him saying that they still think that he's a year away. Ballard never turned down the idea of Eason being the number one guy. They're obviously going to let him battle it out in the offseason, but whoever they decide to potentially get in this offseason, I still think is probably going to be the number one option over Eason, but we'll have to find out. So we're looking at the rest of the second-year players that we drafted. Danny Pinter, great backup offensive lineman for us, had some decent action this year, played a couple different positions. I wouldn't necessarily say he's a breakout guy because I don't think he's going to get put anywhere on the offensive line. I think everybody's staying right where they are for right now. And then, Robert WINDSOR, defensive tackle from Penn State that we got in the 6th round. I liked that pick. I thought he was going to, make the team and potentially be a guy that was going to be a surprise add-on to the roster. Just, WINDSOR didn't get much of a chance. And then out of these last 3 guys here, Isaiah Rodgers, Desmond Patman, and Jordan Glasgow. So Jordan Glasgow, I don't necessarily think is going to break out or anything here because, we know him mainly as the special teams guy. He's been really good for us, has made a couple good plays. So I like that about him. But the 2 last ones we'll talk about here is Desmond Patman and Isaiah Rodgers, because Patman been a healthy scratch for the majority of this year. A lot of people wonder, why is Patman not getting a chance? So do you think there's actually a chance that Patman can join this roster and actually improve? And for Isaiah Rodgers, I mean, this guy was, one of the best returners in football this last year and had to step in at corner in Buffalo when we were shorthanded and really stepped up and played really well. And I think that showed that Isaiah Rodgers can potentially be a corner that Chris Ballard and this team can rely on going forward. So what's your opinion on these two guys breaking out in this next season? Because I think Isaiah Rodgers is going to break out even more, but I'm not so sure about Desmond Patman.
I'll say this, Derek. I think that Desmond Patton is a solid football player, and we obviously didn't see much from him given the amount of depth that the Colts had this year at wide receiver compared to years past. Now, with Patman, I was a little bit surprised when Michael Pittman went down early in the season that they didn't bring in Patman just because he has a similar size to Pittman. Now, the argument, I think, or the counter argument that can be made for that is, well, maybe he doesn't have the same exact skill set as Pittman. Maybe he's not as fast, but we'll never know because it didn't happen. So I'm not sure if he's going to be able to make the team with Parris Campbell coming back and he's going to be healthy. You look at Pittman, you look at if the team brings back T.Y. Hilton, Zach Pascal. And Ashton Doolin, I think, is another guy that Frank Reich and really, really liked. And so I sort of just see Patman kind of staying, no pun intended, staying pat where he's at now. But Isaiah Rodgers is interesting because you mentioned the Buffalo game. Almost had that interception at the end of the second half that I think would have really, really changed things because then Buffalo obviously went in and scored a touchdown. But obviously the ball hit the ground. It's still a crazy athletic play by Rodgers. And we saw what he could do in the kick return and punt return game, especially against Cleveland when the Colts were down, I think, 14 points, and he returned that kickoff 100-plus yards. And it really got the Colts back in that game. But from a pure corner standpoint, I think he has a really good chance because I sort of look at it from this point, Derek. We don't really know what the Colts are planning to do with Xavier Rhodes, whether or not they're going to bring him back. Marvell Tell sat out all of this last year. He opted out, I should say. And, he hasn't really played football in a year, so what does he look like? Is he rusty coming off of a year of rest, or, what does that look like? And then you have Kenny Moore, who's more of your slot nickel, and then you have Rocky Sin, who is the other outside corner. And I think with Rocky Sin's sort of up and down play, for lack of better words, I think Isaiah Rodgers has a chance to maybe compete for Yasin's spot. Believe it or not, this may sound a little bold, but I like what I saw from him in the playoff game against Buffalo and towards the end of the season. And I think that given the, I don't want to say concern, but with just given the lack of, I don't want to say awareness, that's not the right word either. We're not really sure what the Colts are going to do at cornerback or what they're going to do in terms of, like I said, bringing Rhodes back. Yasin's kind of up and down. I don't. Cornerback is a little bit of a concern for me, I guess, especially if Rhodes leaves. And I think that Rodgers performed well. And like I said, I think he has a chance to potentially take Yasin's spot.
All right, well, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Andrew saying that Rodgers has a chance to come for that spot for Yasin. So you all heard it here first. If Rodgers ends up stealing the spot, then Andrew's the one that gets all the credit for that one. So, all right, well, that's going to do it for the second-year players there. Let us know what you guys think there. But now let's move to the third-year players. And there's a bunch of conversation that we can have here. And that would be the first three guys that, we drafted in this draft. And there's still a lot of question marks for all three of these guys. So we'll start with the first one. You're just talking about him a lot, is Rock Ya-Sin. So obviously Rock Ya-Sin, first year in the league, was rocky to say the least in the start. But at the end of his first year, was playing really well. And we thought, this is going to be, an opportunity for him to advance. And then last year, he didn't have a great year. That's for certain. I think that a lot of the fan relations with this is way too dramatic. I think Rock Ya-Sin is an average corner right now, but, he's getting exposed when a lot of other people know that Xavier Rhodes and TJ Carey, they're better corners right now than Rock Ya-Sin. And Rock Ya-Sin going into his third year, he wants to prove he still got it. So what do you think, Andrew? Is he a breakout player? Because for me personally, I don't know how much he's going to actually improve. I think he can improve, but I don't know if it's to a breakout level, though.
Now, as far as Houston is concerned, I know you all heard just a few minutes ago me say that I think that Isaiah Rodgers has a chance to take Houston's spot. And I'll put it to you this way, Derek. I think for Rocky Sin's sake, he better break out because I think Chris Ballard, he's preached for the last 3 or 4 years that it takes time for these players to develop. So it's only fair to give Yasin a reasonable amount of time to sort of come into his own. Now, that being said, if he has back-to-back seasons where he sort of plays below average, given where the Colts roster is as a whole and given the ability of where we think this team can go, then I don't know if Chris Ballard will have the necessary patience to hold on to Houston, even though he was a second-round pick and they had high hopes for him. And like I said, Chris Ballard has preached, these players take time to develop. If the Colts are in win-now mode and Ballard sees Houston as a weak link, for lack of better words, and he feels like he can upgrade or improve that particular spot, then he's going to, I would think. So, like I said, I think for Rock's sake, I think he's a good player, not a great player, and I think that he has a chance, or he should, really. Well, I will say this. The Colts have a new defensive backs coach. Jonathan Gannon is no longer a part of the team, and it'll be interesting to see if he can sort of bring out the best in Houston, and not just Houston, but all the other Colts cornerbacks. And it's not to say that Gannon didn't bring out the best in Houston, but it's a really tricky situation because we saw flashes of what Houston could potentially be in training camp, or I should say Colts reporters did. And like you said, his first year he was okay. His second year, not so much. I think it's important for him to continue to improve. And like I said, for his sake, let's hope he breaks out this next year because, like I said, given the state of the Colts roster, I'm not sure how much time the Colts are going to put towards letting him develop. I don't think it's a situation where it's going to be a 3 or 4 year project or a 3 or 4 year deal. It's going to be you either, come into your own and help our defense, or, we maybe move on from you or you get demoted. So that's sort of how I look at it.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right. We move to the healthy scratch of Ben BANOGU. And a lot of people were wondering, we thought he was going to break out last year. Most of last year, we didn't get to see him. And Eberflus said that it's not how you play during the game, it's how you practice. So meaning to say that, BANOGU wasn't performing in practice the way that they wanted him to. And, he just ultimately didn't get play time because of it. Kind of brings you back to a Tyquan Lewis situation from 2 years ago. What do you think? Does Ben BANOGU do the same thing that Tyquan Lewis does, just has a breakout in training camp and then regains his status as a role player on the edge?
Well, you read my mind, Derek. That's the first thing I thought of when you mentioned Ben BANOGU, is that Tyquan Lewis situation just a year ago where, again, similar to Yasin and some of these other players, we saw flashes of what they could potentially be in training camp during practice. They did not show that while they were on the field. And so Chris Ballard, as a result, and others basically said, we're going to give this role to somebody else for the time being till you can show that, you're ready. And I'm paraphrasing. That's not exactly what they said, but that's essentially what happened with Ben BANOGU, who oftentimes showed up on the injury report as a healthy scratch, which shows that he needed to improve. And I believe Chris Ballard said at the end of the season press conference that BANOGU did need to improve and he did need to step up and play better. And he did the same thing with Tyquan Lewis. And then look what happened this season. He played fairly well. And so maybe that's what BANOGU needed, was sort of evaluate where he's at as a player from a production standpoint. And I think that that could potentially help him going into this season. Now, as far as breaking out, I hope so, because I think that the Colts' number one concern, aside from the quarterback, is edge rush. The interior rush was fantastic. DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart, A+. The edge rush with Justin Houston and Kamoka Toure and Aquadim Muhammad and others, I give it maybe a C to a C-. It wasn't great. For BANOGU's sake, I think that we need him to step up because, you're playing quarterbacks for now anyway, like Deshaun Watson. Trevor Lawrence is probably going to be the number one pick. Ryan Tannehill is mobile and can move, and he's put up top 5 quarterback numbers since being named the starter in Tennessee. So for the Colts' sake, you have the interior rush figured out. Now you just need to figure out that edge rush, and if Ben BANOGU can step up, that would certainly help.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. All right, another player in the second round that we drafted, and that is PARRIS Campbell. So a lot of people have told us that they just don't want anything to do with Campbell anymore. They continue to say he's injury prone, even though that can't be further from the truth. He was plagued with a bunch of injuries because his body just wasn't ready, and it was just some bad luck. And then he even got even worse luck this last year when, he got his knee smashed in from an unfortunate angle. I mean, there's really nothing you can do about that. So me personally here, Andrew, if this guy stays healthy, and I've met him, I've met him. He's really cool. Signed the poster behind me. I love this guy. I'm really ready to say he's going to break out. I swear to you, as long as he doesn't get his knee smashed in by somebody, then this guy really does have what it takes to be able to put up some drastic numbers and make those big plays that the Colts are really looking for in that passing game, whichever quarterback they have. PARRIS Campbell, I think, is ready to break out and show why he was drafted at this point.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know if anybody else has brought up this comparison. And they play two different sides of the football. One plays defense, and PARRIS Campbell obviously plays offense. But his first 3 seasons, to a degree, reminds me a lot of Bob Sanders. Bob Sanders, and by no means, am I comparing Campbell to Bob Sanders from a standpoint of, potential Hall of Fame type player. Right. Now, that's not to say that Campbell can't maybe become that, but it's obviously he's not off to a good start. It's really, really unfortunate because, I mean, Derek, you're an Ohio State fan. You got to watch this guy up close and personal. I'm sure you can attest to this more than maybe I could, because I didn't really know much about him until he was drafted to the Colts anyway. But he's explosive. And I'm not ready. I've seen some fans and others say that, well, it's just another Philip Dorsett situation just because they happen to wear the same jersey number, which in my opinion has absolutely no bearing or relevance to Campbell's situation. Like you said, that hit he took to the knee, there's nothing you can do about that. Unfortunately, football is a contact sport. He just can't stay healthy. I can't remember what the kind of numbers he had in that week 1 matchup versus Jacksonville, but I know he had several catches. He had a big catch, if I remember correctly.
It was, I believe it was 7 catches for 71 yards, I believe was the numbers there.
I mean, just looking at those numbers, you see the kind of production that he has. And, let's just take a little bit of a flashback here for a second. Back when the Colts drafted him, do you remember the YouTube videos that the Colts did? I forget the actual name of the videos, but they gave the fans an inside look at their draft room. And when Chris Ballard called PARRIS Campbell and hung up the phone after they talked and everything, and Frank Reich, he was just glowing with excitement because he knew the potential that PARRIS Campbell had and what he could potentially bring to this Colts offense. And if he can stay healthy, I think he's not just a jet sweep gadget type of player. He is a guy that can run routes really, really well. I think he has matured in that regard with his ability to run routes. He's got really solid hands, and he's fast enough to get behind you. And if you don't know where he is on the field, you better find him, because if not, and you leave him one-on-one, you might get burnt. So
yeah, it's not a question if you will get burnt.
Yeah, if he can stay healthy, Derek. Look at this from this perspective too. What if the Colts don't bring back T.Y. Hilton?
Right.
T.Y. Hilton, not that he's just purely a speed guy. Clearly, I think T.Y. Hilton is one of the better route runners in the NFL. And so I think if T.Y. Hilton doesn't end up coming back and PARRIS Campbell can stay healthy, maybe he steps into that role. He steps into that role as a guy that has matured, like I said earlier, with his route tree. And not only that, but he's, like a T.Y. Hilton. He can take the top off of the defense. So, or if T.Y. Hilton comes back, imagine T.Y. on one side and Campbell on the other, or T.Y. on one side or Campbell in the slot. There's so much potential for PARRIS Campbell. He just has to stay healthy. And I guess let me get to my point here. I think if he stays healthy, given even just the one game that we saw in Jacksonville last season, I think he has a chance to break out. I really do. I love PARRIS Campbell. I love his ability. I love his explosiveness. And I love what he brings to the team. And I think that, like I said, he has a chance to really become a potential star for this Colts offense.
I totally agree. All right, we'll skip Bobby Okereke and Khari Willis here because we've already seen what these two guys have brought to this team, and we know what they're capable of. But let's talk here about this other guy and round 5 pick in the 2019 draft, and that was Marvell Tell. Now, obviously, Marvell Tell opted out of last season given that option, and he was one of the few Colts players who actually opted out. And, you know, he was missed for a couple games. You know, we really could have used MARVELL because the last 6 games, MARVELL really started coming into his own late there in the end. And, you know, a guy that's mainly been a safety for a lot of his career came in and really started playing very well at corner. And MARVELL with that length and that speed, you know, in the zone scheme, knowing of how to play that. MARVELL is a guy that you talked about him earlier, staying whether or not is he going to be rusty when he comes back because he's been a year off. You know, has he kept in shape? What's that's going to be like for him? And, you know, if he ultimately decides to come back this next year, I would assume he would. So, you know, I think MARVELL is another guy that, you know, I think really can show out. You know, it may be tough for him at first because he missed that whole year of football, but give him some time. I think this guy really can break out and start showing you he can be a potentially a number 2 corner if all things fall into play.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. I liked what I saw from MARVELL when he was a rookie. Now, of course, we'll have to go back 2 years because obviously, as you said, he opted out of the 2020 season. So there was one play that really stood out from the season before, and it was the game against Pittsburgh. And I think the Colts were down 7 or 14, and I can't remember which player it was, maybe James Washington for the Steelers. But MARVELL just comes up off of like a slant or drag route, or maybe a shallow cross, and he just puts his helmet on the ball and pops it out of the receiver's chest. And the Colts end up obviously recovering, and it's a big momentum swing. I say that to say this. I sometimes, Derek, I think there are players that you just see 1 or 2 plays and you think, oh, okay, yeah, that player has potential. You know, Darius Leonard in that training camp when he's a rookie and he picked off Andrew Luck. Julian BLACKMON in the game against Chicago. Kari Willis in the game against the Minnesota Vikings. You know, sometimes, like I said, it just takes that 1, maybe 2 plays from a player just to get that that thought rolling rather of, you know, okay, you know, does this player have something, you know, unique or special? And I think that one play against Pittsburgh that Tell made, I think says a lot about his potential. And you and I had mentioned, you know, the potential rust coming back from, you know, obviously not playing. What's that potentially going to look like? You know, obviously, if there's turns out to be another season that deals with COVID, does he come back or does he stay out again for a second season in a row? There's a lot of unknowns at the moment, but let's just operate under the assumption that he's going to come back. It'll be interesting to see, that's for sure. I mean, I think it's something to monitor. Like I said, I like the transition from safety to corner. I think he's got potential. I'm not ready to say that he's going to break out yet just because of him sitting out all this past season, but we'll see how things go. And like I said, it will certainly be something to keep our eye on moving forward.
EJ Speed, another guy that I thought, you know, if the time is right, I think EJ Speed can fill into that role really well. But I just don't know when that's actually going to happen, if that's ever going to happen.
You know, EJ Speed is a player that I really liked maybe a season or 2 ago. But given how well Chris Ballard drafts at linebacker, I can't see him overtaking Okereke or Darius Leonard at all whatsoever, in my opinion.
You guys heard it here first. This is Andrew and I talking about the 2nd and 3rd year players and who we think will break out or has already broken out for this Indianapolis team and heading into 2021. Let us know what you think, guys. Who do you think is going to break out? Is there somebody that we didn't mention that you think we should? And keep in mind, it's just the draft class. It's not the people that we brought in. Want to say thank you to Andrew so much for coming on and doing this with me. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.